My guest this morning is Marquita M. Gammage, is a full professor in the Africana Studies Department at California State University, Northridge, CSUN. She earned her Ph.D. in African American Studies from Temple University. Dr. Gammage's research examines the calculus of media effect on the sustainability of anti-African racist ideologies through the intersection of race, gender, and media. By analyzing current popular media productions, reality TV, television dramas, social media, etc., paired with an Afrocentric historical and cultural lens, her research demonstrates how the continued, misrepresentations of Black womanhood in the media and society in general can be predictive of future public policy initiatives that endanger the freedom and liberties of African Americans. Additionally, her research explores racial equity and the academic success of African American students, high-impact practices, and asset-based pedagogy. As contemporary media continues to be a battleground for the portrayal of Black women, Gammage explores the troubling proliferation of racially informed media depictions of the lives of Black women, providing essential insights into the intersection of race, gender, and media representation in today's world. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Marquita M. Gammage, Ph.D. Dr. Gammage, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you so much for welcoming me, and good morning to the listening audience.
Well, I tell you, as we talked a couple of minutes, as we were just chatting, prior to going on air, I'm appreciative of all of my guests. Every guest I've ever had over the 23-year period I've been on the air, I'm appreciative of all of them, but I'm extremely appreciative to those who are on the Pacific coast, on the Pacific time frame, because listening audience, as you know, it's 7 o'clock here, or about 7:05 a.m. here, but it is 4:05 a.m. there in California, as Dr. Gammage is calling out of Los Angeles. So again, thank you. I appreciate you for taking the time to rise early. 4 o'clock on Saturdays is what I get up to get to the studio, so I know how early that can be.
Not a problem. This is a great opportunity to talk with you about the new book.
So yes, the book was just released. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to work our way up to that. But as I share with you, I really don't work off a question list, but I do start with a basic question in terms of, all right, is writing something you've always done, or if it was something, as a child, were you always writing as you went through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, so forth? Or did it come later in life, as a result of your studies, what have you?
It definitely did not start in childhood. In fact, throughout my early educational experiences, I would say I was unofficially misdiagnosed as uninterested in learning. And at one point, an elementary teacher assumed that I may have had dyslexia. Of course, she didn't have any training to make that diagnosis, but I was treated as such in the classroom. And so I was regulated to the sidelines and say, well, you don't have to try. We don't have to engage you. And so there really wasn't any reading or writing that was brought to me in terms of that educational setting. But I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, by my parents, my mom in particular, and my 7 siblings. And during that time and in that space in the 80s and early 90s, we were exposed to a lot of culture, a lot of richness. And that kind of first sparked my understanding and my love for Blackness. And literature and writing came much later on, largely when I became a student at Howard University in undergrad.
That is interesting because, first off, all right, your history is a perfect backdrop for what you've been studying. Because, again, as I heard you and listened to you, when I am not doing radio, and the listening audience knows it because they hear it every week, but when I'm not doing radio, my actual day job is a school principal. So I know how kids can be labeled and mislabeled. As a matter of fact, I hate the labels because I'm a wordsmith in terms of I hang on every word and I know the power of words. So once you start labeling, what children will do is actually begin to live that label.
Exactly.
So now as you're going through and you know, these, because everything connects for me, because urban children, African-American children, people of color, black and brown children tend to get labeled quicker.
Very early.
Yes, especially the males. So it's interesting to hear you from a female perspective say you now were mislabeled or misdiagnosed by somebody who really wasn't even qualified to make the diagnosis. Now, see, that gets into, again, what folks, or shall I say the importance of having people who look like you standing in front of you as a student. Now, I'm not saying it has to happen, but however, the more that it can happen, because this is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Tafari, because she was doing her studies and she wrote her book about African-American male teachers being in front of children, particularly in the lower grades. This kind of connects and is definitely going to connect to your topic of your book. And we're going to work our way up there in terms of the bulk of, matter of fact, with you, the bulk of our conversation is going to be on your book. I'm not even going to take a whole lot of time to work our way up there. We're going to go straight there only because it is an extremely important topic and one that I have seen over and over again, particularly in television and movies, because not only were the women really stereotyped and miscast, this, that, and the other, but it happened with the men and African Americans in general. So how did you, based on your upbringing, your background, going to school, how did you land on this topic? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the book is titled Media Racism, The Impact of Media Injustice on Black Women's Lives. How did you land on this topic?
Yes. So once again, growing up, seeing all of these diverse and positive and really beautiful representations of Blackness contradicted what I was learning in school that really said that Blackness wasn't worth studying, so there was a void. And I grew up in a primarily Black community, but the educational materials was not reflective of the students that were being served. And so once I went on to Howard University, and I was one of the first in my high school to do that, I graduated valedictorian and got a scholarship because that was the only way that I could afford to go. And it was there that I once again was surrounded by, global diversity of Blackness and Black culture and Black literature and Black stories. And that is what contradicted what I was seeing on the media. And at the time, you saw this increased viewership of rap music videos and music videos in general that largely just portrayed Black women as sexual objects, right? And so seeing this and seeing my reality, they didn't parallel. And that was when I first began to study when I was a McNair scholar at Howard University. I began to study representations of Black women in hip-hop. And at that point is when I really started to dive in as a researcher. I thought I was going to go to law school. I was all set and ready to do that. And then I became this McNair scholar and did this research project and was looking at these images, and I could not turn away at that point because it was just a contradiction from my lived reality since I was a child through early adulthood.
And see, I'm taking in and listening to what you're saying, and thoughts are running through my mind because I'm actually taking a course this semester in cultural responsive leadership. And the instructor in that course is Dr. Danielle Wallace. I don't know if she's listening this morning or not, because I did invite her to join, to listen in this morning, particularly because I knew the topic we were talking about. And we were in class last week, and I had made the statement that, because we were talking about the banning of the books and curriculum in Florida, so forth and so on. And I had made the statement, and I've made it here on the air as well, and I'll always make it, is I don't understand how the learning and reading about of slavery and our history is more traumatic for white kids learning and reading about it than it was for the African American kids who lived it. And her pushback to me was, yes, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, in Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro, he gets into how our education system overall is traumatizing for black and brown children because we're never reflected in the studies of our contributions. In other words, what's constantly perpetuated is you have to go to the back door. You're not good enough. Your people didn't contribute anything to the world, that everything is about European or Eurocentric contributions or greatness. When you read Naeem Akbar's, when you read his book, The Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, he gets into that whole thing too, that no matter where you look, white folks' greatness is, they're surrounded by that. And we need to be just as dogmatic in making sure that we're surrounded by black greatness. So I tell people all the time, I am an unapologetically proud black man.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I don't care if my white brother say I'm an unapologetically proud white man. I'm fine with that. But don't try to take away from me. The fact that you are what you are, don't try to take away from who I believe I am. And see, this is where we're going here with these. If you look at TV in general, because I'm sure you know the show Good Times.
Yes.
Okay, because if we go back, I'm going back up. I'm older than you. I know. So as we go through the various TV shows, we had Good Times. If you remember the Brady Bunch, if you remember, I'm trying to think all that. My Three Sons. Make Room for Daddy, Father Knows Best. If you go all the way through these various shows, there is one thing that's portrayed in one set of families, and there's another thing that's portrayed in the other.
Exactly.
Now,
and that is poverty and lack of cultural value. Right. And so like what you see in Good Times is while you see a family banding together, they're attempting to build community, they're attempting to build economic stability, you see the constant struggle of poverty. Versus in those other shows, you see, even lower class white families that they have good, wholesome American values, that they can thrive, that they have good things that they're training their kids on, good values that there is something to be looked forward to about white American culture and the white American way of being, especially the middle-class white family, versus the how we have situated the black family in the ghetto. And, well, I grew up in the ghetto. And so my reality in the ghetto was, once again, seeing brilliance, seeing ingenuity.
Correct.
One thing folks who have not had access to resources is that they understand how to be creative. They understand how to budget. They understand how to make a way when there's no way. We grew up low-income family. Like I mentioned, there were 8 of us, 8 children. There was never less than 12 to 14 kids in the household because my mom always took in family members, even friends of ours who needed housing. And yet I didn't know that we were poor until I went away to college.
Correct.
And because of that type of ingenuity, because of that community-centered approach, and so yet, but these representations have situated the black family in poverty, in the ghetto, as constantly struggling, as never able to get ahead, even when there's a desire or goodwill to do so. And so when you look at the historic representations, this, it's a repeating representation of this culturally deficient black family, black cultural model. And as a result of that, black families continue to find themselves, black men, black women, black children continue to find themselves behind the 8 ball when it comes to upward mobility, when it comes to, espousing Americanized values, as another illustration, and in so many other ways, which we'll get more into. But those historic representations repeat themselves in more contemporary forms. And so you'll see even current media reflect some of those same ideologies of the broken, the impoverished, the unworthy black family.
Absolutely. Because, see, I'm going to work my way from, like we were talking about Good Times, up to, as you were talking about, the rappers, so forth and so on. So, all right, I was doing some reading on Esther Roll. She plays Florida in Good Time. And Esther Roll, people may or may not realize, was an extremely powerful actress at that time. She was from Jamaican descent. And She, as I said, as an actress, as an African American actress, had some juice in Hollywood, if you will. So when they originally wrote Good Times, it was going to be Florida as a single mother. There was no James written in there. There was no father written in there. And Esther Roll made it very clear, if you do not put a father figure in this sitcom, I will not play the mother. I will not be a part of this if you're not going to have us as an intact family, because every black family is not just single mother household.
Exactly.
That there are black families who are intact, to have mother, father, kids. So she was very clear on that. And Norman Lear and all the folks that were putting the show together, they acquiesced to her request. They're like, oh, you know what? All right, we want you enough that we will do what you're asking. So she was the one that stood up and said, I will not do that if you're going to perpetuate that the only way a black family is together is through a single mother. I'm not doing that. Whole, the whole notion of Good Time, like I said, if you juxtapose that against like a Brady Bunch, so forth and so on, and you're absolutely right. Because see, this is the thing. When I talk to people all the time, there's a lot of subliminal messaging that's sent through the media.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's blatant, sometimes it's stark, but most instances it's subliminal.
Absolutely. And that's a really good example of the power of black women in these industries, right? And we'll talk about that. That's one of the last chapters in the book. We'll talk about how black media creatives and entertainers are taking hold of the media and saying we're not buying into or subscribing to these anti-black and anti-black woman ideologies in the media. They're creating their own space. But so that's the perfect example, because at the time of the show Good Times, that whole idea of black family instability did not correlate with the data. But yet we were starting to see shows that reflected the black woman as the matriarchy of the family and the black male as absentee, and largely absentee because of alcoholism and criminality. And so those messages contradicted the reality. Like, think about it. In the 50s and through the 60s, you saw the black family on the front lines during the civil rights movement, for example. Through the 70s and early 80s in the Black Power movement and the Black student movement, you saw families on the front line. And when you look at the actual research data, you still see that marriage was a high value among African Americans, and that majority of families early on were still in two-parent-headed households. And so it's just a contradiction, and that's what media racism looks like. It's when we represent communities, in particular for the focus of this book, black families and black communities, in ways that contradict their actual lived realities.
No, you're absolutely right, because, all right, now I'm going to zoom from Good Times to The Cosby Show. Now we had, Felicia Rashad, who's down there at Howard. You have Bill Cosby, you had the kids and everything. And I actually had someone tell me, oh, that's not reality. That could never happen. You could never have a black doctor and a black lawyer married with family and house and kids. I mean, somebody actually told me that. Like, that's not reality. And at the time, I did know a couple. They were the reverse, where on The Cosby Show, Bill Cosby was the doctor and Claire was the lawyer. I knew a couple where the husband was the lawyer and the wife was the doctor. And so I said, wait a minute, that's not true, because I know people who are living that exact lifestyle. And yet you had a good part of the population was under that mindset of, oh, that's not reality. That could not happen. Now, they could not accept that, but they could accept us being, like you said, drunkards. They could, us being, pimps and this, that, and that they could accept. But they couldn't accept the fact that now you had in front of you a doctor and a lawyer and an intact family. It still is one of my favorite sitcoms, goes back from the 50s. It was The Honeymooners with Ralph and Alice and so forth and so on. And again, I had somebody tell me, oh, I don't like that show because, again, it was how now in that particular case with Ralph and Norton and all that, they were lower class white. And you had Ralph and Norton, they're like the whole male dominance, the gender thing going on. So I had a Caucasian woman say, oh, she didn't like that. Well, how is it you could like it when it's depicted for black families to be like that, but you don't like it when it's depicted for white families to be like that?
Well, I'll talk about a little bit of Daniel P. Moynihan's report for the U.S. Department of Labor. in 1965. In that report called The Negro Family, The Case of National Action, he ultimately argued that it was the black woman who created this framework for this pathological dysfunction among black families because the black woman was becoming too educated, was becoming too gainfully employed, essentially saying that the black woman stopped taking care of white families. And as a result, the black family was falling apart. All of his research was not based in any evidence, his personal assessments and assumptions, I would argue. And what it did was it affirmed the need for white male patriarchy and for black families to reflect that. And so when you put out a report like that saying that black children will be the cause of all crime, personal crimes against other persons, for example, that black men would be emasculated and that black women pursuing of education and careers will be problematic, then you have media and policies reflecting those types of messages. And so when you get a show like The Cosbys and later shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it becomes a contradiction to the public narrative that we have been socialized to believe. And we've been socialized for centuries to believe this about black families, that they were not valuable, that the black male was not a successful contributor to the black family, and that the black woman was emasculating to the black male. So when you see those types of representations, we fail to believe them even when we see them on a daily basis. And we still see representations of highly educated black couples raising their children and active in their communities to this day. That is still a very prominent representation among black communities and black families.
But see, therein lies the problem. What you were just saying is that perpetuation of a construct. It's that perpetuation of stereotypes. Is that perpetuation of, like you said, socialization. And there are folks, especially in the climate that we're in now, who really wants to go back. I mean, when we talking make America great again, that's really what the underlying tone of that is. Like, let us get back to exactly what you just described, black women in the kitchen serving white families. Let us get back to slavery. That's what the underlying message is there. Make America, because in many minds, that's when America was great.
Exactly. And it was the same campaign slogan that Reagan used. And it worked then, and it worked for Trump as well, because it's this idea that the white American middle-class family model is the model that followed. And that model says that whiteness is greatness and that everyone else must shed off their own cultural identity in order to adopt a white American family model. Well, when we look at what that model is, and yes, some people simplify it as, husband, wife, 2.5 kids, and a dog, right? Picket fence and home ownership. What they also don't realize is that's the erasure of black culture. That is the erasure of black cultural values, black heritage, black history. Do we not see that happening with the banning of books, with the banning of curriculum, with the opposition towards AP courses in African American studies? We see this constantly because what we find in those books, in those courses, in that curriculum, is that African Americans have been significant contributors, not just to American history and American culture and values, but to global history, right? African people have been instrumental in shaping the world. And so yet we want to ban those things because if we're making America great again, it's returning back to white supremacy as the dominant form of American social politics and American social order.
That is correct. Matter of fact, I'm sitting here looking at your book saying your book wouldn't even make it to the state of Florida. They would stop your book at the border like, no, this one's not coming in. But
well, we ban books.
Yeah, exactly. This would join the list of the band. Yes, and but in all seriousness, going back, it's the perpetuation. And see, for people who look at things through the lens of like what you and I are talking about today, we can see it. But there are a lot of people who can't. Matter of fact, when I get into discussions like this, depending on who I'm talking to, they tell me, oh, you think too deep. And my pushback is, well, no, you don't think deep enough. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, Denzel Washington, Halle Berry, both of them won those Oscars or Emmys, whichever one it was. They won them at the same time.
Yes.
Folks lost their minds. Oh, they just thought it was the greatest thing going. And I said, no, I don't. I said, why you don't think so? I said, because you need to look at what the message was sent there. Because Denzel Washington and Haley, both of them had played some extremely significant and powerful roles as positive black people and never won an award for those roles. Denzel now plays a role cop in Training Day. Matter of fact, that's out of all the Denzel films I've seen, in my view, Training, because there are people who love Training Day. I didn't. But in any event, he plays a rogue cop in Training Day. That's what he received. Now, mind you, forget Glory, forget Denzel, forget all these other powerful roles he's played. A rogue cop. That's what he gets awarded for. Haley, on the other, same deal. Dorothy Dandridge, Losing Isaiah, other powerful roles. She now gets the award for Monsters Ball because she strips butt naked in there. And so now here she is. Because, see, this is what I was trying to tell folks. Do you understand the message that was being sent was this is how we see you. As long as you stay in the framework that we see you in, we will award you. But once you step out of that into an area that's not how we see you, we're not going to award you for. Some people, oh, you think too deep. No, you don't think deep enough.
Yes, that's the classic representations of the Jezebel for the black woman and the thug for the black male. And it mirrors, like in D.W. Griffin's 1915, The Birth of the Nation, Gus, right? In this representation of the black man as being hyper criminal and untrustworthy, even when representing law enforcement. And so, your analysis, I would argue, is spot on, that it was problematic in the sense that, one, there were much more positive and stronger portrayals that these actresses and actors have represented, and many others who have been overlooked to this day. But at the same time, the ones that were in fact selected played into these century-old myths and stereotypes about black men and black women. There was not a departure. These are just modernized forms of old stereotypes. The Jezebel is the loose black woman who is sexually seductive, lacks education, lacks the willpower to be gainfully employed, for example, and self-sustaining, unable to take care of her children, have illegitimate children, right? And so when you see Halle Berry play this role and succumbs to a sexual relationship with a white male, and that exact scene of her now stripping down, as you stated, right, is the scene in which you see this grotesque representation of black women. It does not even parallel her earlier scenes in the movie where she is showing dedication to her loved one who is now facing the death penalty. But instead, it shows this abandonment. She has no morals. She has no value. She has no value for the black male as well. And that she relies on the goodwill of white men in order to survive, in order to move forward in her life. So highly problematic roles, but highly rewarded roles at the same time. And if you look historically, those were the roles those types of images are the roles that oftentimes get the accolades. It is not the roles that challenge the stereotypes, that challenge the false racist ideologies. It's the roles that play into those. It's the roles that amplify those ideologies that are oftentimes highly rewarded.
Absolutely. I told you, when I had that discussion, I get hit with, oh, you think too deep. But that's exactly what was going on there. We were being, like I said, rewarded for that's the pigeonhole that we put you in. Now, going back to what we were talking about with power, folks in power, you get somebody like an Angela Bassett or a Danny Glover or those that will say, no, I'm not doing that role. No, I'm not taking that. If that's what's in there, I want it. They did the same thing Esther Roll did. If that's what's in there, I won't be in there. So if you want me to be in it, you're going to make some changes.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there are just not enough individuals who own the media and who are at the table making those decisions who will even listen to those, even those most powerful black actors and actresses. And so you have individuals like Ava DuVernay, Issa Rae having to create their own production company, having to secure funding outside of major production companies in order to put on films and shows that they believe in, that they see value in. And we see value in, right? Because we gravitate to those shows. But we see value in those things. At the same time, it does not fit within this racialized model of how African Americans and how Black people, African people in the diaspora and around the world are represented, right? It does not fit within that. So for decades, we saw this representation of Africa, for example, as very impoverished, as having no resources, as needing the goodwill of white people to go in and save, right, Africa and its children. And what really it was is the perpetuation of these racist ideas about Africa in order to justify the continued colonization, which we call neocolonialism in Africa, right? It's that same idea that we see here with African-American women and the Black family. You see this with Black men and Black children, is that these images represent us as criminals, as unfit for motherhood, as unfit for fatherhood, as untrustworthy, as uninterested in education. And as a result of that, we are met with public policies that then reflect this need for social control. And so in the book, I argue that if we pay attention to what is happening in the media currently and has happened in the most recent years, we're able to predict the future public policies that are going to be coming out that are anti-Black family, anti-Black woman, anti-Black male. So when you look at these reality television shows, for example, and almost every single show you're seeing, and it's not exclusive, it's not all shows, but it's the majority of shows on broadcast network that dominate mass media. You see these shows where Black women are constantly fighting in public spaces, no matter what country they're in.
That's right.
No matter where they are, at baby showers, they're fighting at christening, they're fighting in the church, they're fighting at social activist events. They delegitimize individuals' involvement in social conscious activities, for example. And so you constantly see these images of this violent, out of control Black woman. So we cannot be surprised when we start to see policies or new additional policies, I would argue, additional policies seeking to control the Black woman, her body, and her reproductive rights.
And see, you went exactly where my next question was going to go in terms of you touching on the reality TV shows. And see, again, that's why immediately, just like we were talking earlier about being misdiagnosed as a child, especially an African-American child, many women are misdiagnosed as angry Black women. And part of the reason they're misdiagnosed is, and I'm using misdiagnosed for lack of a better term, the reason they're misdiagnosed as angry Black women is for what you just said. And this goes back to what I was talking about with the subliminal programming.
Yes, absolutely. And it ties in, especially when it comes to the angry Black woman is also largely attached to professional Black women. We see
correct
more. And so with that said, and they use, and we think about what we're seeing in the headlines right now. Professional Black women, think about it in higher education and academia. You see professional Black women being fired and removed, being disgraced from their jobs, not necessarily legitimately. You see suicide. You're seeing Black women's mental health declines. You see among professional and highly educated Black women, reduced birth rates, high infant mortality rates, even high mortality rates during pregnancy as well, and delivery. And so what you're seeing is that there's this disconnect between the parallels of these highly racist, toxic workspace environments, right? These racially hostile environments against Black women. And when Black women respond legitimately to that racist terrorism that they're experiencing in the workplace, they're considered angry, hostile, problematic. And their response could be monotone. It can be official paperwork. It can be the simple questioning. It can be their response in silence. Their silence is police. I can't tell you the number of Black women I speak to on a regular, including my own reality, where we are policed in the workplace. Our mere presence, the way we walk, the way we look, if we don't speak, if we speak in the morning, for example, there's this constant policing of Black women. So no matter if you're silent or if you are vocal about the injustices that you see in the workplace environment, you're the angry Black woman, because it plays into this stereotype of this century-old characterization of the Black woman in the workplace as the sapphire. She's too educated. She's too smart, right? And as a result, she's characterized as problematic, as challenging the status quo. And by status quo, white male leadership, right? Her
Spot on.
Challenge to white male leadership.
No, that's
is a challenge to white woman's leadership.
Yes.
Right? Because we're constantly told, get in the back, like it's white men, then it's white women.
No, that's right.
Like, and then with like Daniel P. Morton saying, to get even further back, because then it should be the Black male when it comes down to African Americans as the illustration. But we know there are many other races who get much further in front of us when we're talking about those leadership positions. So when Black women are in a position of leadership, their authority is then mischaracterized as hostility, as anger, simply by the mere fact of them being in the position of authority and leadership. So it becomes a highly problematic representation in the media that's perpetuated, that then reinforces the negative assumptions that we see in the workplace, such that if a Black woman say something as simple as, I wonder if there's another way we can look at this. Oh, what are you saying? It becomes a hostile attack on her for having a difference of opinion. Highly problematic realities that we face in real life. And unfortunately, those things are not translated on the television. Instead, we're the scandal, we're the problem, we're the angry ones in the workplace creating these issues for ourselves and everyone else.
As I was saying, you're spot on, because if we can go through a litany or a laundry list of just over the last few months, you got President Gay there at Harvard. You have Letitia James here in New York. You have I'm trying to think of the young lady's name who did commit suicide down at Lincoln. You have Fannie Willis down in Georgia. You have, so the list goes on in terms of, and again, look at the things that they're pulling out, for lack of a better phrase, about them and what they represent. Again, you have Dr. Gay would be representing cheating. Okay, you have Fannie Willis, which would be representing back to, again, the promiscuity. You have the young lady that committed suicide, the mental health issue. So they're definitely targeting and pulling and perpetuating this image of, and at the same time, that's nothing different. I'm not condoning one way or the other, but I'm saying mountains are made out of molehills that have been done by others. The fact that you have somebody with 91 charges still able to run for the presidency of the United States, and yet you go after Dr. Gay for a comma or either parentheses or something placed in the wrong place or a statement that was, you go after her for that, where she winds up losing her job. Versus this one has 91 charges and is able to still run for the highest office in the land.
Because we have normalized white male leadership under any and all conditions. I mean, if you think about it, historically, white male leadership has represented the enslavement of African people, has represented segregation, has represented the criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of Black families, the criminalization of the ghetto. Right, if you think about these things, right, and then also this hyper policing of Black communities. This is what white male presidential leadership has represented historically and contemporarily, right? And so that is in line. Like, so when we think about Trump's representation in his campaign to make America great again, he's saying let's get in line with white male leadership's approach to American governance. But yet, Black women are represented in these very hostile and toxic ways. But this is something I talk about in Chapter 3, unhealthy representation of Black women in television dramas. In these television dramas, we have found, and some of them we love, so, y'all don't come for me because I'm analyzing some of y'all shows that y'all absolutely fell in love with and y'all love the characters. It's because Black women's brilliance on the screen make you fall in love with these characters. But that doesn't mean that these characters' representations are not problematic.
Correct.
Images like scandals, for example, Olivia Pope, Annalise Keating, and How to Get Away with Murder.
Correct.
When you Mary Jane and Being Mary Jane, for example, these women are all the controversy in their own lives. They are represented as untrustworthy, right? The cheating idea, right? When you talk about President Gates, right? The whole untrustworthy criminal behavior, bending the rules, blurring the lines as an illustration. They're represented as having high risk sexual lifestyles. They're involved with married men. For example, they're involved with multiple sexual affairs as another illustration, right? So you see this representation as well being linked to Black women in leadership. They have mental health crisis. They rely heavily on alcohol consumption as another illustration. They're disconnected from their families and their communities. And even like with the being Mary Jane, while she has that relationship, is represented as a toxic relationship where she sees them as a burden to her lifestyle. And she doesn't include them on her real lived experiences and realities and her struggles. And so when you see these types of representation, and they all have abandoned motherhood until Mary Jane in the very final season, in the very last few episodes, she now becomes awakened and becomes a mother who has achieved everything that she desired without ever showing her putting in the work to earn that in her life, right? But in those shows, while we have fell in love with the characters because of the talent of Black women to bring life to those images, right? Those images have been very problematic. And so when you see those images conclude, now you also see, so that's what I was saying, I guess think about what we're seeing, what policies, what practices, what social behaviors or constructs will we see as a result, or we're seeing as a result of these types of images, not exclusively, but these images have been impactful for how we treat Black women. So we're treating Black women in a way America has been emboldened by this subjugation of Black women, this criminalization of Black women, and this public attack on Black women leaders in these public spaces. And as a result of that, they're being fired. They're being forced to leave their jobs. They're quitting their jobs. They're committing suicide. They're facing major mental health crisis. And we can imagine a host of other things happening in their personal lives as a result of this type of treatment. But America really has become emboldened with this mistreatment of Black women in professional spaces. We've seen it for centuries with the mistreatment of Black women in general, right? Affluent or otherwise. But we're seeing it even more emboldened. And I think that what I'm trying to argue here in the text is that in the same way that we saw these representations as the crack mama and the baby mama, with the crack mama era and all those representations of Black women as reliant on drug consumption at the expense of motherhood and at the expense of their babies' lives, we saw a flood of public policies and public practices that criminalized the Black woman and took away and restricted her reproductive rights, right, and her right to motherhood. And then also you saw with the baby mama, you saw this idea of an epidemic emerging of Black women being ill-prepared to be mothers, ill-prepared to maintain a family unit. And so you saw this representation of the single Black mother, right? The young single Black mother relying on welfare. So what do we see? Welfare reform. So now that we're seeing this, what are we going to see next? What's the next wave of policies when we see representations of Black women in this way? And then we're seeing it acted out on the public stage against Black professional women. What is the next wave of public policies we can anticipate as a result of this?
No, you're right on point. Matter of fact, going back, like I was saying with Letitia James here in New York, because, you know, each one of these cases against our former, many of them are headed up by African-American women. Like I said, you have Fannie down in Georgia. You have Letitia up here in New York. You have Alvin Bragg down there in that D.C. area. But, I mean, Trump's, I don't know if she's still his lawyer or not, but this Alina Habba, for the most part, she publicly said Letitia James was stupid. That was pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what she was intimating as she was making her commentary a few weeks ago. Everything that you just said is what this woman, Alina Habba, was implying about Letitia James. And you know, it just goes on and on. Listening audience, I hope you've been with me since 6, but certainly I hope you've been with me since 7 as we're talking about the book, Media Racism, the Impact of Media Injustice on Black Women's Lives. The author of that book is my guest this morning, Marquita M. Gammage, Ph.D. Earlier when we started talking, you said one of the things that influenced you in terms of writing this was the whole notion of how we're being portrayed by our rappers. Now, as we were talking, you just said it a couple of minutes ago about folks might be getting testy because you were going after Scandal and all that kind of stuff. I didn't watch any of those shows. Matter of fact, I never watched Monsters Ball intentionally because of. That's why I refused to watch them. And so now, do we sometimes become our own worst enemy? Because most of our hip hoppers and rappers are African American, and yet they are the ones calling all our women female dogs and whores.
Yeah. So one of the things about hip hop is that it really started off as a cultural force in our communities to say that we exist, we are here, we have something that's worth being seen, we have something to have joy about because Black joy matters, right? We have something to bring that, right, to bring into the world. And we see still to this day, hip hop is very influential to the global audience, right, in terms of fashion, style, hairstyling, linguistics. We see all of these different ways that hip hop has influenced the world industry, right, in terms of economic industry. But yet you see these contentious representations towards Black women, historically Black men, because it's not just the assault on Black women in hip hop, it's assault on Black men and Black families in hip hop as well. But then you also have Black female rappers engaged in this as well, because it says that in order for you to be the best, you have to perpetuate these certain types of representations, right? So MC Lyte or Queen Latifah never reached the height of some of the most popular Black female rappers because they didn't fall in line, I would argue, with the systemic assaults on Black womanhood, with the paralleling of the Jezebel, the hypersexual Black woman, right, who is willing to shake in a thong or almost no thong, right, on television shows, on war shows, and music videos, and then this current quote-unquote beef among some of the top Black female rappers that keeps happening. And so now we see one currently between Meg Thee Stallion and Nicki Minaj. And it's one of those we're entertaining ourselves. We are buying into this falsified beef between two Black prominent female rappers when the real beef against Black women is America. America
correct,
systematically assaulted, raped, abused, enslaved, terrorized, criminalized, right? And continues to terrorize the Black woman in this country. And so that's where our real beef should lie, not necessarily among each other. And our energy should necessarily be poured into a tradition in hip hop and rap in particular of battle rapping, right? We're pouring our energy into a battle rap that's happening among Black female rappers that many will argue has got out of line. However, when we think about where the real beef lies, it's not among Black women entertainers, right? It's like saying, well, so-and-so got this role in the movie versus someone else, and I think I could have did a better job. I was much more deserving. Well, the reality is there's just not enough jobs. There's just not enough spaces. There's this false competition that's created among Black women in these media industries, in music, in television, and film, this false competition that only one of you, right, if any of you at all, will be able to stand in this position, will be able to stand at the top. There's not enough room for all of you, right? There's not enough room for even two of you to stand in those positions. So we create this false competition, which we not just see in these type of music and media industries. We see this in every industry where Black women are pitted against each other in the workplace.
Correct.
This is what, and that's part of America's, promotion of anti-Black womanhood.
No, that's correct. Because, see, all of this stuff is by design. And this is why a lot of time when we have conversations like this, either people get lost or they just don't think that deep, or they think we're conspiracy theorists. But the truth of the matter is, this stuff is done by design. It's not like somebody's just sitting there like, well, just see, how can I go after Black women? No, it's not that. It's overall. You have to connect the dots with everything that's going on. And this gets back into, again, the perpetuation of what roles are we offered? What roles do we take? Again, we may be the most wonderful actress in the world, but what message are you sending through your role? Or what message are you perpetuating and continuing through your role? See, going back to what you were saying about Scandal and all, that was my issue with Denzel and Haley winning those awards. So, I mean, I don't think people understand, because, see, again, Norman Lear, he just passed away not too long ago, but I don't think people really understood the brilliance of what Norman Lear was really saying, even with the show All in the Family, with Archie Bunker. I don't think people really understood what Lear was trying to show through Archie Bunker, because if you remember that show, most of the time Archie was wrong, but Archie represented Caucasian male. Most of the time, Archie was wrong. I don't think folks picked up on what Norman Lear was really trying to get across there. And so we can send messaging through media, which is what I think you're getting at here in terms of media, regardless of whether it's television, radio, streaming, movies, what have you, is still perpetuating this whole notion of black females being unworthy. I mean, when you think about it, because I see you mentioned Michelle Obama in the book too.
Yes.
Really, seriously, because she showed her arms, because her shoulders were out, really?
I mean, when you think about Fox News erroneously proclaiming that we should leave Barack Obama's baby mama alone, right? That she's being attacked as a baby mama. That's the erroneous representation, right? The overfixation on her wardrobe, right? So now she's framed as a fashionista, and her degrees, her work experience, her community activism, all of that's washed aside for what she's wearing, right? Even the selection of music as she walks on stage for different events, right, becomes problematic, and how they situate her in those settings. This falsification of her being a baby mama. The definition of a baby mama is a unwedded single mother. Well, Michelle Obama didn't have her children out of wedlock, and she's not a single mother.
That's correct.
Clear contradiction, but yet it doesn't matter, because all black women are categorized in this way of unfit for motherhood. And I would argue that Michelle Obama's major campaigns have been, yes, in support of her husband, former President Barack Obama, but it also has been her proclamation and right to womanhood and motherhood as a black woman. If you look at her speeches, if you look at what she's talking about, her most valued, right, roles in the world, in her life, in her destiny, has been her role of mother, right? Has been her role as a black mother. And yet that's largely ignored because we want to fixate on what clothing is she wearing?
Correct.
What face did she make? What did she, and we're completely ignoring her proclamation of black womanhood. Her proclamation of womanhood is largely ignored. And she's been, demonized as a anti-American terrorist, have been painted by a foreign magazine as a product of enslavement, right? Might have seen that image of her face superimposed on an image of an enslaved black woman with her bust exposed, for example. Those types of representations, once again, are systemic attacks on black women.
Correct.
So here you highly educated, professional black woman who is a mother, who is a community advocate, who's being framed as illegitimate baby mama, who's been framed as a descendant of enslaved people, who has been, and as if the mere fact of being a descendant of an enslaved person means that you have no value. Well, enslaved Africans never lost their value. I mean, not even monetarily. That's why there was a price. That's why even when someone ran away, you had a reward. So we never lost even monetary value when you put us in that little categories. And I don't subscribe to the monetary value placed on African people, right? But not even to their own metrics did we lose value. But yet the media continues to perpetuate this idea that black people, black women, black families, black culture has no value. And as a result of that, we need to be policed. As a result of that, we need to be under some form of social control. And that's the danger of the next wave of public policies is what does social control look like in the 21st century going into the next century? Because what we've seen in the past is social control meant colonialism, enslavement, segregation, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, right? Sterilization. What does it mean next? What does it mean next for us?
No, you again on point, correct, spot on. Whichever way you want to, whatever word you want to use for affirmation and confirming, absolutely. Years ago, back in the 90s, I taught diversity. I actually traveled around the country for AT&T, and I was teaching, leading workshops, facilitating workshops in diversity. And they made sure that, because there was always 2 or 3 of us together as facilitators, and they made sure the facilitation team was as diverse as they could get. It was never 2 or 3 of the same people together at one time. So you would never have 2 straight males. You would never have 2 straight women. You would never have 1 black man or 2 black men or 3 black women. You would never have a homogenous group. It was always diverse. And one of the exercises we would do during that training was we would put up those big Post-it notes, the big poster-sized Post-it notes, and we would post them around the conference room. And we would put categories on there: black women, black men, white women, Jewish men. We would put Hispanics. We would put jocks. It was like a laundry list of categories because it was an exercise about stereotypes. And this is what we would tell the participants. We would tell the students, all right, listen, this does not have to be what you write down on the little sticky, does not have to be what you believe. It could be something you've heard on television or seen on television, or you've heard, but it doesn't have to be something you believe. What we'd like for you to do is on the little yellow stickies, write down anything that you've heard or know or think about those particular groups that's on the big posted paper. Dr. Gammage, without fail, no matter where I went around the country, we got the same things on those sticky notes. I could have just taken the sticky notes from one workshop and just took them with me to the next one and put them up on the board myself. Under black women, lazy, shiftless, have a lot of babies. I'm trying to think of some of them. Again, love the sex, angry. The stickies were the same. And at that time, the movie White Men Can't Jump was out. So when it came to every session that I went to, somebody would have to be the one on their sticky under white men would say can't jump. We were trying to show that there's no such thing as a good or a bad stereotype. There's like stereotypes no matter which way, whether you think they're good, because under Hispanics, 50 live in a house, 50 drive in a car, all smell like garlic. We got under Jewish people, cheap, run everything, about jewelry, they were the same no matter where I went around the country. We came to white women, homemaker, very soft-spoken, easygoing, housewife. I'll bet you if I did that exercise right now in 2024, I'll bet you it would come up the same.
I believe you. People don't realize the power of the media. It used to be your family, your church community, or your religious community, your actual community, your peer groups, your school were the primary socializing agents. Media is one of the main socializing agents, especially with the wave of social media. Is one of the primary socializing agents, not just for youth, but for adults as well. And so the media plays a significant role in creating perceptions and ideas, these ideologies around groups of people. And so even when the data does it, even when the data does not reflect it. So it's not just the news that promotes false information, but these television shows, radio stations, songs, all of these things can promote these same racist ideas about groups, whether they are positive or negative. Take the historic misuse of the African Americans and the use of watermelon as a means of economic mobility was then stereotyped because it was a threat to the idea that only white men and white families could have economic mobility and economic power. They can have business ownership. African Americans used their knowledge of farming and the lands to be able to grow watermelon. It was cheap seed to purchase to be able to go forth and sell that, and you got a large product out of it. And they use that as seed money then to literally as seed money to then pour into other businesses. Black business ownership, including the sale of watermelon, became a threat to the white American narrative of Black laziness, of Black inferiority, of Black economic instability. It was a contradiction to that. In the same way that you saw Black Wall Street, right, in multiple places, right? You saw this in Tulsa. You saw this with Waco, right?
Correct.
The burning down, the terrorizing of Black economic strongholds, because it contradicted the false narrative that Black families were economically reliant on American public assistance, that Black families were uneducated and they could not be trusted financially or politically. As an illustration, it did not fall into line with that. And so as a result, you see white domestic terrorism against Black communities, Black business ownership. And so the whole mythology around Black unhealthy love for watermelon was really a racist stereotype that was created to justify the attack on Black business ownership by selling the watermelon to raise funds to then create economic stability for families and communities. And so that's why it's so important that Black media producers, Black media owners, in fact, then create these counter narratives, right, that address social justice issues like Ava DuVernay When They See Us, for example, that reclaim the African-American family heritage and that shows celebrations of Blackness and Black culture and Black heritage, right? And so we see this in song. And so as a result, we don't always buy into those. So when Beyonce, for example, declared Black is King, right, when she addressed social issues in her Lemonade album, for example, people were like, oh, my goodness, what is she doing? This is out of line, out of touch. Well, she's still a Black woman in America.
Correct.
Right? Her eyes closed to these things. She's still a Black, and she used her platform to address different themes and to showcase the diversity of Black culture in the Black is King, for example. And yet there's these attacks when these types of representations are done. So in the same way that we're seeing these banning of books, don't be surprised that we see these banning of movies or this lack of endorsement of movies. So when we say, oh, well, they put out this movie, but it wasn't well supported, one of the things I like to point to people is like, where did you see that movie running? Was it in any Black communities? Was it available where, right? So like the movie Origin that's out right now with Ava DuVernay, I found one theater in my area showing it twice a day on the weekends only as an illustration. So, like, let's not act like this is going to be box office hits when they're not being picked up by these theaters and these production houses to be able to show and actually have the audience to meet those box office sales. Like, let's be realistic about this. But we don't look at those numbers. Instead, we say, oh, people don't want to keep seeing these narratives. People don't want to keep talking about race. No, it's the media that doesn't want us to engage in these critical conversations about race. Media doesn't necessarily support, right, because of this racist structure, does not support celebrations of Blackness, celebrations of and the return to the Black family heritage, or counter narratives that challenge these falsifications of our history. The media does not support that because it's a contradiction to its very existence.
100% correct. Ladies and gentlemen, listening audience, and Marquita, we've come down to the end of our interview, but what I do here is I turn off my mic and you have the opportunity to promote. And the only thing you can't say when we do that is a dollar amount. Anything short of that, the mic will be yours. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about the book, Media Racism, the Impact of Media Injustice on Black Women's Lives. And the author of that book is Marquita M. Gammage, Ph.D. So, Dr. Gammage, at this point, I am going to turn off the microphone. You have 3 to 5 minutes or so to promote anything you like to promote. Like I said, the only thing you cannot say is a dollar amount. But anything short of that, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking with you this morning. To the listening audience, the book is a good read because it challenges what we are seeing in the media currently and what we have seen over the past decades, and how the media continues to use representations of Black families within a stereotypical framework to promote messages that then are endorsed by public policies and political figures that reinforce these racist ideas about African Americans. But media racism isn't limited to African Americans. We see media racistly attack other groups as well. But for the focus of this book, which is Media Racism, the Impact of Media Injustice on Black Women's Lives, the focus is on how these misrepresentations, these very strategic and systematic racist representations, are designed to steer the public away from supporting Black families by way of not supporting the Black woman. And so I want to encourage you all to pick up the book. It's available everywhere books are sold. You can go right to Universal Right Publications or website and secure the book there. We're available once again on multiple platforms. I do look forward to engaging more about the book. I think it's an important topic to discuss because we haven't framed media in this way before. Instead, we've talked about individual shows, songs, genres, for example. But when we look at the larger scale industry, media itself, mass media, we're talking about newspapers, print advertisements, social media, television, film, radio, and the sort. When we think about it as a larger interconnected, interwoven system that socializes the public and really the world into how we think about certain groups, and that's a powerful industry that we have to interrogate, especially when we look at research studies. A lot of studies will show that many folks don't have interactions with African Americans on a daily, weekly, monthly, or ever basis, but yet they have these perceptions and assumptions about Black families, about Black women, about Black men. Well, we have to ask ourselves, where does this come from, right? It comes from their home environments as well, but also the media plays a significant role in socializing the public into how we think about particular groups. And so I want to invite you all to engage with me in this work about media racism and start to pay attention to the images that we're seeing, the messages that we're seeing, these false beasts and entanglements that are becoming a dominant narrative around Black women. What does that mean for us in the future in terms of public policy? I want to thank you, Marc, once again for this opportunity to talk, to dialogue with you, to dive a little bit more into the book. I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to dialogue with your audience and larger audiences about how we can begin to transform the media into an affirmative space for people of African descent. Thank you again.
Well, I thank you, as I said, for rising early because, folks, Marquita is on the West Coast. She's out there in California. So while it's 8:10 here, it's about 5:10 there, roughly thereabout, somewhere there. So that's 3 hours behind us. So I thank you for rising early and having this thought-provoking discussion this morning. And I record the show, so I'm going to put it up on my YouTube channel for folks who did not rise early with us. They still have an opportunity to hear it because it will be on YouTube, as well as I will send you the links, the MP3 links, and I'll send you the MP3 as well as the YouTube link, and you can blast that out to anybody you like. Once you get them, they're yours. I'm not worrying about copywriting. I'm not worrying about trademarking. I'm not worrying about any of that. I just want the word out. So you can share that any way you want once you receive them. And yes, we will definitely be in touch. I have to once again thank Dr. Ayo Sakai for hooking us up and connecting us. And as you heard Dr. Gammage say, the book is available. It is published by Universal Right Publications. So you can go right to that website, the Universal Right website, or like she said, it's on other platforms as well. The website for Universal Right is uwpbooks.com. That's capital U, capital W, capital P, capital B, OOKS.com. If you go there, you will find that book and many more. Because if it was released on what, January 27th?
Yes, the 23rd.
The 23rd, I'm sorry, because I wanted to have you on the 27th. Right? So it was released. This is hot off the presses, folks, literally. January 23rd is not even a month old yet. So again, the title is Media Racism, the Impact of Media Injustice on Black Women's Lives. The author is Marquita M. Gammage, Ph.D. Well, Marquita, again, thank you so much, and we will definitely be in touch.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Same here. All right. Take care now.